This is not just a jolly evening in a country pub. It's a meeting between a huge multi-million-pound organisation and its customers. There's Anthony Yateman, PRO for the company. There's Tony Ingleton, dairy manager. David Gibbs, rep. He meets the farmers regularly. Ken Eubank, managing director. Red Rendell, farmer. Mike Madden-Mayers, arable products manager.
Imagine what it is when you're going to start.
The company is Christopher Hill Corn Merchants, part of the rank Hovis MacDougall empire. The corn merchants of Britain and the farmers both work to get a living out of feeding the rest of the population.
The relationship between the farmer and the corn merchant, of course, is one of the oldest of all commercial relationships in this country or any other country. It goes back many, many years. And it has, of course, retained a lot of the early characteristics. There's, generally speaking, a large amount of trust between both sets of people. There has to be. The business these days is a very large one, involving very large amounts of money. And the other point that is, I think, rather different from many other industries is that the company has a deep involvement in what the farmer is actually doing. If you think of it, if we're supplying the seed or the fertilizer or the feed or whatever we're doing, or buying his grain, we're watching it throughout the whole of the year. We're seeing it grow, we're seeing the progress they make. And of course, many people will tell you in this industry that inside every corn merchant there's a frustrated farmer.
Dried, I suppose. Yes, what about the majority of it's okay though, isn't it? Yeah, much better.
Once it was a trade full of small country firms, but most have closed down or been bought up by one of the giant national firms. These two men belong to one of the independents, Tucker's, based in South Devon.
Can't see much better this year, I suppose, because of the weather.
The crop of wheat they're examining grew during the drought of 1976, that unique year in British farming. It was grown under contract for Tucker's to be sold as seed corn. A view from this angle reveals any tall weeds like wild oats. Before a firm can sell seeds it's grown, it must follow strict government and common market regulations. Both these members of the firm are qualified crop inspectors, having passed stiff exams. It's all part of the effort to control seed sold. The system is so strict that it's dangerously close to numbering the individual grains of corn. Every aspect of the harvest in 1976 was altered by the long drought and the heat. It was very early, about a month earlier than usual. It was down in quantity. There was an attack by aphids and an explosion in the number of ladybirds to eat them. It wasn't only cereals that were down, the haymaking and silage were also poor, which meant that farmers were short of winter feed for cattle. It was during that summer that the repercussions of the harvest began to filter through the international markets. Outside Europe, the harvest was very good. As all the information from the markets of the world was assessed, the prices shifted. But one clear fact stood out. It was going to be expensive to feed cattle in Britain during the winter. and great quantities of cattle feed would have to be supplied by the corn merchants. This is the time of year when the farmer's relationship with the corn merchant is at its most traditional. It used to be a simple business, buying the farmer's corn and selling him the seed. Then the cattle feeding business came in, and the trade became much more regular during the year. The merchants used to be the bankers for the farmers. Accounts were settled annually, but inflation has changed all that. What hasn't altered is the degree of trust between the two sides. The corn merchants is a trade with a long history. It probably started in prehistoric times. When individual farmers start having a surplus, the corn merchant appears. The Bible story of Joseph and the famine shows how organized the corn trade was in ancient Egypt. It hasn't always been a good relationship with the farmers. There have been times when corn merchants were the villains of country life. In Britain, the start of the corn merchants is usually associated with milling. Britain was covered with windmills and watermills, thousands of them, each serving their local community. There's still a few left in working condition, like this one in Sturminster Newton in Dorset. In medieval times, they were usually owned by the lord of the manor, and if you were his tenant or serf, you had to bring your corn to be ground at his mill, and the fee for this was a proportion of your crop. When it was a monopoly situation, then the amount deducted could be exorbitant, or the flour you got back could be of lesser quality. However, this changed, and milling became a competitive situation, and the jolly miller entered folklore. You could always identify a miller. He never seemed quite to be able to dust himself off properly, and his hands were covered in scars from working at the stone mill wheels, which needed continual dressing to keep them grinding properly. Richard Wheeler is in charge of Tucker's maltings, which means that he's always buying malt barley for beer making.
How many acres was this one?
30 acres.
Yeah. And you've just about finished this,
I've just about finished it, yes,
Yeah.
and that's the other one.
Fine.
There's 20 acres of that, which I consider is better.
Yeah, it is a bit.
A bit.
Yeah. No, well, we'll get those tested, but I would think they'll be all right. Certainly for the season.
Yes.
They're not too bad.
No.
That's fine.
And no weed.
No.
Bob Henson has been selling his crops to Tuckers for many years. It's not quite a formality, but they do always agree quite easily. The business of malting barley is a specialized one. If a farmer grows it, he can do well. The price is higher, something about £100 a tonne. But the drought years, and 76 was very bad and 75 wasn't good, have meant a shortage of malting barley. In dry years, there's usually too much nitrogen in the barley. The price agreed is always subject to analysis. Tuckers always try to buy their malting barley from their regular local customers. But they couldn't in 75 or 76, and they don't like this very much. For them, it's breaking the relationship between themselves and the South Devon farmers they live amongst. However, they were able to buy some locally of the 2,500 tons they needed. Their maltings are in Newton Abbot, in a building put up in the 1900s. There's a ritual gesture practiced by everybody at all levels of the business whenever they meet a new consignment of grain. It's not usual for corn merchants to be maltsters as well. Not many of the traditional corn merchants were, and in the big combines, it's usually a different branch of the business. Straw was too valuable to waste by burning off in '76. There were hardly any harvest fires that summer in the fields. Christopher Hill were also out buying grain. The headquarters of their branch of RHM is in Poole, just beside the harbour quay. Though they're much larger than Tucker's and they're part of an enormous combine, they have to operate in just as traditional a way at the farmer's end of the operation, however modern they are in the office. Christopher Hill were founded in 1846 and taken over in 1962. Their annual turnover is about £33 million. This 8,500-ton silo is only one of the Christopher Hill buildings in Poole. The mill on the quay that used to be the firm's buildings is still there, with a change function. That happened to all the corn merchant buildings that still line the quay, including Yateman's buildings.
But we got to the stage that this mill was manufacturing 15,000 tons a year. We couldn't make any more in the building as it was. We couldn't modernize it anymore. So we either had to build a brand new mill somewhere else, which would have cost a fortune, or change the use of the existing structure. So the family retained the property and sold the business to Christopher Hill. And I continued quite happily with him.
And I felt thoroughly sick for about half a year, I think.
But you're proud of it now, aren't you?
No, I'm absolutely reconciled to it and delighted with the situation, but it was a hell of a sort of wrench to see what had been going in the same family for 112 years or more.
Yes, it was.
Pack up. But it hasn't packed up. Here we are, sitting in the old mill, and my grandfather's, I'm perfectly certain, hovering about somewhere, enjoying the fact that it's going to go on in a new role, and my son in a new headquarters. My old grandfather was a bearded chap with a civic pride. He became the mayor of Poole and chief magistrate, and I suppose there are about 7 to 9 corn merchant firms here in Poole, but one by one the business is folded or the old men died, and now we're down to one, Christopher Hill's, isn't it?
All over Britain are the monuments of the corn merchants, the corn exchanges. This is the Bristol Exchange, built in the 1740s, at that time probably the biggest building in the commercial centre of the city. They were built to provide comfort for the large numbers of merchants who had conducted their business on the street. There's usually an area of a market town called Corn Street or something like it. The grandeur of the buildings represented the importance, or perhaps the self-importance, of the merchants. Many corn exchanges are still in use, rather too big for the numbers using them. In its great days, it was the meeting place for hundreds of men, each representing quite a small firm. The empty spaces represent the firms that have gone out of business, been taken over, or who now just do everything on the telephone.
Well, there you are. You've got to come up now to your 185 no good. Berserker.
Usually, the firm of Tuckers come here from Devon to sell their surplus malt barley. This year, they're buying.
Promise, which has been rather disaster this year in our particular part of the world.
This is before.
The rugby from forward, yeah.
You haven't got
I haven't got nitrogen, I don't know what. And Hassan, which seems to have got the size this year. That's down to 182. Well, we're getting up a bit. What about 185?
No, it's too high.
185 refers to the nitrogen content. The less, the better. Normally, anything over 170 wouldn't be considered.
No, I let that one go at the moment.
Do it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, nice to see you again.
That's a lot of fun. Thanks very much.
We had a good trade last year.
Yes, I'll let you know on this Monday, I think. Okay?
Right.
Tuckers were founded in 1831. Many of the firms of corn merchants seem to have started then. The Industrial Revolution meant a drift away from the miller to the wider-ranging organizations needed to feed the large cities. This was also true of the business of malting barley. Originally, when pubs brewed their own beer, they malted it themselves. As brewing became centralized, so did malting.
Harold?
Oh, Harold, that small kiln tomorrow can go 8 or 9. Which do you think we've got more room?
Number 8, I think.
Number 8, okay, fine. We'll put that in 8.
The purpose of malting barley is simple. To make alcohol, you need sugar, and the sugar in beer comes from barley that's been allowed to germinate. The process starts by soaking the barley, and then it's spread out over the malting floor. There are large factories that do this work in more of a mass production way, but at Tuckers it's basically the same technique as has been used since beer was first discovered by prehistoric man. The barley is handled at least 3 or 4 times in the day, raking, turning by hand. The purpose is to give it lots of air so that it grows at an even rate, and so that the roots cannot tangle themselves together. There's an art in this shoveling to get an absolutely even spread. To an extent, there's a curious background of speculation to being a maltster. The breweries send out their orders in July so that Tuckers know how much barley they have to buy. But the brewers don't negotiate till November, and then it's a fixed price contract for the year. After 5 or 6 days on the floor, it's ready for its final stage, when it's cooked in large ovens. Hot air is forced through a layer of barley. After it's been cooked for some hours, the barley is ready to be sent to the breweries. The drought of the summer of '76 finished abruptly in early autumn. It brought a sudden green to the countryside, which made it look as if no damage had been done, but in fact, many pastures needed reseeding. The autumn storms ushered in a winter that was as spectacularly wet as the summer had been dry. The corn merchants are deeply involved in the business of persuading farmers to use new techniques. Farmers are bombarded with advice from many sources.
Now, what I think you should realize is that the agricultural aeroplane in the hands of professionals is really a tractor of the air. Experts perform at least as well, at least as accurately as tractors.
They're told all the latest techniques, but it's the merchants who have to convince the farmer that it's actually worthwhile spending money to use them.
Utilizing the entire wing downwash to increase penetration. The slot width of the aeroplane is up to 80 feet with a wingspan of 44 feet 5 inches and a working speed of 105 miles an hour. The spraying capacity at this speed, the 80-foot squat,
The image of the cautious, conservative farmer is now a character for romantic fiction. The farmer in Britain has had too much experience of the effect of modern farming techniques on his profits to have any doubts that it's worth listening and trying out new ideas. So when Christopher Hills lay on a demonstration like this and prove the precision with which an aircraft can deposit fertilizer or weed killer or insecticides, even in bad weather conditions, then farmers are prepared to be convinced. They can see that it's quick and efficient, that planes don't touch the growing crops, and that it's about the only way to control something like aphids on cereal crops. They're told that used properly on the right farming operations, it can be cheaper than tractors. This combination, the farmers, the merchants, with the backing of the government, the chemical firms, the agricultural machinery firms, this alliance of interests is what determines the look of the countryside today. In 30 years, it's changed nearly every aspect of farming. Compared to a few years ago, the crops are weed-free, insects and diseases are controlled, the meadow has vanished to be replaced by fully productive grass. It sometimes seems that the only uncontrolled aspect of farming is the weather. Certainly what the townsman sees as he travels through the countryside is an efficient, practical business that only incidentally is beautiful. But the farmer's function has always been to grow food and make good lives for themselves and their families. The vegetable trade likes to sell swedes for human consumption that are grown on the red soils of Devonshire, and Tuckers have supplied for at least 50 years Tucker's Devon Champion Swede. It takes 4 years before the selected Swedes produce seeds for Tuckers to sell. They have to estimate in '76 how much they'll need to sell in 1981. It's ironical that this little crop grew well in this field because a tiny thunderstorm occurred over this hill at the right time, while all around the Swede crops failed. The qualities of this Swede that are being looked for are a nicely rounded top and good shape and size, qualities that will be passed on in the seed.
Since we've come into the EEC, the regulations have been tightened up very considerably on the seed trade. There's new certification schemes come in which have been arranged by Brussels, and we've had to sort of comply with these, which has meant a lot of reorganization, and all the seeds we sell now are certified seed, and we grow crops on contract which have to be inspected and certified, and we're only allowed to sell certified seed.
Roy Webber is one of the directors of Tuckers.
Oh, hello, Dennis. Those two nitrogens you're waiting for. HJ40 is 2.02 and BB40 is 1.76.
Tuckers maintain a small laboratory to work on the seed side of their business, seed germinations, nitrogen and moisture content of barley. It's probably the range of activity of Tuckers that has kept them independent when so many relatively small firms disappeared. They were never just buyers and sellers. They're involved in all aspects of the business.
This one here, you see that? You might take that shriveled egg.
It's in the autumn and winter that the seed crops harvested for them are processed and prepared for sale.
Yeah, there aren't they?
Before it's put into bags, numbered and labelled according to EEC regulations, the seed is cleaned and covered in chemical protection. The bags of Lothar Abed are being prepared for spring planting. Other varieties are already out on the farms being sown. After the autumn, the rain really set in. Three or four times a year, a number of independent firms hold meetings in a motorway hotel of a company they've formed to market seeds. Tuckers are part of the consortium Primer Seeds.
To total expenditure of the royalty income derived in '76 to be used in promotion of the variety.
The language of their business is almost incomprehensible to the outsider, but basically the combinations of firms represented here means that they're big enough to deal with the seed breeders, and therefore will have good products to sell that are their own rather than just buying from suppliers.
Cador quality winter wheat have every prospect of being winners. Taking Cador first, Cador is the first quality variety with an 8 out of 10 NIAB rating on milling quality that is right up in amongst the feeding wheat on yield. That it has 103 rating on yield by the NIAB, which is only 3 points behind Huntsman.
These people are committing themselves to take so much basic seed for planting in autumn '77, and the produce of that planting will, generally speaking, be sold for final consumption, so to speak, by farmers as first-generation seed in '78.
In our sort of trade, the national companies have taken over a lot of the merchants in the country, but when I do hear that there is another merchant being taken over by the nationals, it doesn't worry me at all, because I feel that the nationals are looking for a return on the capital that they invest in these companies, and if they can make a suitable return, we ought to be able to.
Identify as many weeds as you can, and then come back with a recommendation as to what department should use and when.
It's probably true to say that a corn merchant business is as good as it reps. They're the people who actually go out and meet the farmers. They're the ones who have to be able to give advice, and it must be the right advice. They need training and refresher courses. These are Tucker's reps on a rainy, windswept field in March, making sure that they know the answers to weeds.
Knot grass, partially peeled. Yes. Well done. Speed wheel. Yes. Cleavers.
And then the first true leaf is coming up on that one. You could begin to see it's the more typical knot grass leaf.
It's quite a good weed spectrum here. Yeah. Always quite a bit of it. Yeah, and that wasn't good on much.
They spend the day with the people from their chemical suppliers so that they learn the latest techniques with weed killers.
Both weeds are best controlled by Compitox Extra. And it's quite handy that chickweed begins with a C, cleaver begins with a C, and Pompidou Tester begins with a C. And, you know, really when you look at weeds, you're trying to learn something from them.
So nipplewort, don't forget that one, it's a difficult weed.
Yes, that was a difficult
You want
one
either
to kill.
Oxtal, one of the HPN herbicides. Kill it. Does the best job.
Every firm of corn merchants looks for the ideal reps. Some of the qualities needed can be listed.
Honesty, enthusiasm, he's got to know what he's doing. Especially today, he must be highly skilled and highly qualified. It's no good going out thinking you can sell without having a very substantial knowledge. And you must be totally confident of the product that you're selling. With my own company, with Christopher Hill, we think we make a superb ration, and there's nothing that we sell that we're ashamed of.
Who the bloody hell's that coming?
Dave Gibbs.
David Gibbs, rep for Christopher Hill, making his regular call on Reg Rendell.
Afternoon, Reg.
Good afternoon.
And how are you today?
Tuesday's your day, too.
Yes. Are you better this time?
Aye.
The last time I came to see you, you were looking decidedly ill.
Nearly dead.
Yes. Yeah, I thought, well, I don't know about Reg. You got to alter a bit, otherwise you won't make the spring. But still, you look very well. How's the sheep?
Oh, some and some.
You still got the ewes and lambs in the yard there?
Yeah. I'll look at them.
Yeah, I'd like to do that. Right. But you're all full of a dog up there.
Aye, dear old boy, he is.
Yeah. Derry, what have you been giving a sheep?
Well, mollicine meal and oats, see? They eat a hell of a lot of it.
Yeah.
And they ain't fatting. They ain't fatting half so well as they ought to be.
No.
You know, I think they're growing, but...
They're not getting fat.
They ain't getting
and
fat.
you want to get them fat for the Easter trade, really, don't you?
Well, there's some will come out if we can get them fat enough, I think.
Yeah. I think perhaps they ought to have a little bit more protein, the lambs, you know.
We must send some on.
Well, I think, you know, if you had a lamb mixture and added your oats to it on a half and half basis, and fed them to appetite so that they almost, you know, ate as much as they wanted. Can we go and have a look?
One essential fact about a rep like David Gibbs is that he's not working on commission, and the farmers know it, which means that they tend to trust his advice more.
You go on, you talk to a farmer, you have a deal, he gives you an order, that's good enough, you place the order, it's delivered. You don't bother about getting a signed contract for his food, because he has his food every fortnight, or every week in some cases, depending on the size. But your word's your bond, and that's good enough. You'd no more break it than fly to the moon.
You put that one
I'll do that.
back for the accounts then, don't you? Right.
Right, you
need to make the check out.
It's a regular custom for the rep to write the check, and then the farmer signs it.
There's only once in how many years?
Well, must be about 12, 14 years, I reckon.
That's fine.
Yeah, but I've only been with the firm 14 years, so...
No, don't sign.
Anyway, if you would sign your autograph...
Right.
By and large, the farmer wants to see the chap he's dealing with, and he doesn't really want to be dealt with on the end of a telephone, except when he's got a complaint that he wants to make very quickly. But by and large, he wants to see the person he's dealing with, he wants to see him regularly, he wants to be able to turn to him for information, and he wants to trust him. And I believe that that personal relationship is the key to the whole thing. Now, it may have to be spread more thinly. As times get harder for all of us, we may not be able to spend quite as much time per farmer as we've done in the past, but we'll have to make up for that in the quality of the service we can give while we are there.
Do we go and have a look at the cows?
There are many different types of farm on David Gibbs' patch, including very large estates like Rushmore. This is one of the dairy units on that estate.
Yeah, Yeah. And you've got a very high percentage of heifers in this year, haven't you?
Yeah, I suppose we must have. Well, we have.
Yeah. Sort of, what, 20%?
20% heifers, yeah. That's the build up for the numbers.
Yeah.
But they're actually 150 down here. These are the low yielders, mind you.
Yeah.
David Gibbs' personal turnover is about £1 million a year. And in a bad time for farmers like last winter, he would be selling even more cattle food than usual. The bills for cattle food are very high.
If you're thinking of 100 dairy cows worth £350 each, the followers that go along with them, there you're talking about 35 to 40,000 pounds worth of livestock. He's probably spending something in the region of £150 a cow to feed them and the followers. You multiply that by 100 again, and you're getting some idea of the sort of money that's involved. Very large amounts of money involved, frighteningly so.
Is there anything that sort of sticks out that you don't sort of think is quite right or could be improved upon?
Well, actually, I'm fairly happy with this dairy. It's doing quite well. It's the second year of a herd. They started last year as a heifer herd. They're doing quite well. They're achieving target despite a very expensive winter feeding period.
With costs like these, it's no wonder that farmers make use of every help they can get. David Gibbs's firm produces elaborate computerized analyses of the costs of feeding a dairy herd and the results achieved by the dairy manager. The dairy manager programs each cow's food supply.
And this cake usage is fairly high, 0.51.
Yeah, I am rather alarmed about the cake consumption, but of course we have had a bad winter.
How many gallons a day?
Stuart Walker is the manager for the Rushmore estate. For him, the main importance of the regular analysis is that he can tell if the dairies are achieving their economic targets. It looks like a nightmare out of science fiction, but the whole system still relies on the dairyman's knowledge of his cattle. It's no good giving a 5-gallon cow the food for a 7-gallon one, and the computer can't replace the day-to-day observations of a man. It's a long way from jolly milkmaids, though.
Shortly be up to 600 gallons, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, there are a lot of farms around here with a turnover of £500,000 to £750,000 a year. That is a larger one, obviously. If you're talking about a smaller farm, you're still talking about £100,000 turnover a year.
Wherever farmers collect, there will be representatives from the firms. They're always at every market. There are a great number of firms that farmers can buy from. The nationals, the local private firms that are left, and many farmers belong to cooperatives. It's a strongly competitive business, working on tight margins.
New varieties coming on now that, there's several new varieties they are bringing out, actually, which are supposed to be improvements. Have you got plenty of straw about?
I'm more of a straw hay.
All these root crops are bad, aren't they?
Will you be buying any seed corn then for the spring, Mr. Cole?
Well, I may have enough me on, I think.
Will you?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, 2 pence, I should think. 3 pence. 3, yeah. Well, they look a bit small, I tell you.
It's a real good barley, actually. It's been out about...
How much ton is it?
It works out at, which you would rather know, at £8.50 a hundredweight. The Mazurka is a real good barley, but it's...
Well, is there any straw attached to it?
Inclined to break down. The ears are inclined to break off, actually.
No, embers in with that then?
No.
You meet a tremendous number of people, and the farming community are a very interesting and friendly community. And it is a most fascinating and enjoyable life because, you know, we're not sort of stuck in a city office. I mean, I spend a lot of time in the office, but I do manage to get out a bit on the farms and, you know, see our friends and customers. And it is a sort of most interesting and enjoyable life. We get our problems.
It's a second wheat crop, so it's quite likely to get some disease problems. And I think that it would be absolutely...
When a real expert looks at a problem and gives his opinion, it's hard to remember that nature is involved at all.
Have a look here, you can see that actually there's a fairly good plant cover, and you consider the amount of rain we've had since this went in, because it went in on, what, November 20th? That's right. Not into the best conditions for winter wheat drilling. And the plant population, by and large, is fairly satisfactory. You've got some chickweed, which you would expect, and a certain amount of grassweed. And I think you're right that high-tane next week to try and take out the grassweed will be the first operation. And concluding the season for the W plan, Septoria sooty mole fungicide, growth stage 10. Good. Well, I would think that's sorted out as far as we can go now, Stuart. And first operation, top dressing with nitrogen just as soon as possible. It's pity the aeroplane can't do it. The aeroplane will be here later this morning to do the winter barley and the winter wheat.
Christopher Hills used the key at Poole for importing. They import a great deal of cattle food, soya beans, maize, and have an office in Poole concerned with buying supplies from anywhere in the world. The business of buying internationally is very specialized and takes nerve. In one afternoon recently, soya went up £12 a tonne and then dropped £8. And if you make your phone call at the wrong moment, you can cost your company thousands of pounds.
Particularly with the problems we've got with the bridges here at the moment. To Southampton? Yes, well, you've got that inquiry. OK. Well, we'll talk to you later then.
And, you know, we've had various bits and pieces.
You don't think Chicago will have much influence on it?
You know, cover us and the problems here.
No. No, I'd rather not have a 1200 at the moment. We've got a rye boat, some wheat boats and a barley boat coming, and I think that'll be quite enough at the moment.
Just want to check with you about the situation on wheat feed at the moment. You know, what's the situation for the remainder of this week?
Yes, OK. Well, anyway,
we've got the remainder of this week.
Well, difficult to tell. Chicago's been up and down over the last few weeks, as you know.
Who's that, please?
At the moment, I think.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry, he's on the phone just at the moment.
Good. Only the thing we want to be sure of, as you're aware, you know, we've been buying quite a lot of wheat feed in because of the recent problems. But I've got very little, in fact, for next week or indeed forward.
Tuckers have just opened up their new seed store, and it's perhaps here that their involvement with their customers is most precise.
That's right, yes. I sent you a quotation. Well, I'll see what I can do. I might be able to ease a few more coppers, but it's what I quoted you for was sort of the best varieties, you know.
They've been supplying grass seeds to the Devon farmers for long enough to know in great detail exactly what is needed by all their customers. They have their regular mixtures, but they can also make up a special mixture if a farmer's land needs it. The atmosphere is very consulting room.
In September time.
Yes.
And I think we've fairly well got over that. What I really want to discuss with you now is this year's seeds mixture.
Springs now, yes. Well, you've caught up. I mean, a lot of people, I think, have only just realised how badly their pastures have been. There's 1.8 hectares, so 1.8, yes, somewhere in the region of 60 pounds. How are you? Nice about things? Yes. What can we do for you then?
2 year solids mixture, that's what I was after.
You're off 2 year solids mixture. We've had our number 22 last year, didn't you?
Yeah, well, that
it did fairly well, did it? Well, it did well. Just we'll have the same again, I'd think then.
Bring it back and we don't grow, all right?
And so each year, the combination of farming tradition, common market regulations and science produce crops for us to eat or drink. And Mr. Hawkins gets his special mixture.
And so the various aspects all come together, the manufacture of fertilizer, the offshoot of the chemical industry in terms of agrochemicals used in this country and exported. So but my own particular section of it is the one that's in direct contact with the farmer, possibly more than any of the others. And we're the people who sell our products to the farmer and to a very large extent buy many of the products that he produces, particularly grain, of course.
And in the middle of August, it's possible to draw up a balance sheet for the harvest of '77, and it looks very hopeful. Hay was good, so was silage. The barns are full and bursting for the first time for several years. The cereal harvest is happening at the proper time, and at its halfway point, it looks promising. But it's always possible for something to go wrong. However, the weather has to be very bad nowadays to defeat farmers. It's unlikely that the corn merchants will be selling as much to farmers this winter as last. In a business sense, they lose by good harvests, but as individuals, they're as pleased by the harvest as the farmers. They've been involved in the process too, and it's always good to see results.